Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English 221, where we are finishing watching a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And where we left off was what seemingly would be the ending of the play in Act 4, but Shakespearean plays are 5 acts long. So this fifth act, even though it doesn't necessarily seem like it's necessary to the plot, it's extremely important and serves as a kind of mirror to what we've just witnessed thus far. So, if you'll remember, we were right on the cusp of basically resolution, where the love juice is going to be removed from Lysander so that he can return to loving Hermia, which is how the beginning of the play started. And then the love juice will be remaining on Demetrius so that he once again loves Helena. This is somewhat problematic, and we'll talk about this next class about how, quote, happy unquote, this particular ending is. Certainly it's happy for Helena, though many contemporary audiences have wondered why Helena would still want Demetrius after his behavior towards her. But the idea that Demetrius is, in effect, manipulated in order to love Helena is somewhat concerning. That said, if a comedy is supposed to end with marriage or the promise of marriage, at least in this instance, that criteria is fulfilled. And if we wanted to assume that the status quo was resumed, then the status quo would be prior to the beginning of the play, Demetrius had once loved Helena, and Helena had once loved Demetrius. So this could be seen as a restoration of order. But again, as I indicated, we'll talk about this a little bit more next class. The love juice is removed from Titania. At this point, she realizes that she was in love with an ass, and I don't know how many of us have ever made similar realizations once the spell of love has been removed from our eyes. Of course, Titania is a complicated character because we see her as a very strong female presence at the beginning of the play in which she defies her husband, but by the ending of the play, not only does her husband exert power over her, but she's been manipulated. And you've probably noticed that the actors who play Theseus and Hippolyta are also playing Titania and Oberon. This was a very deliberate choice in this production to illustrate the similarities between those two couples. And in fact, all of the couples share certain levels of similarities because all of them are struggling with issues about love, albeit they are all in different stages concerning love. And then finally, the donkey spell also has to be removed from Bottom. Not that he's no longer an ass. I mean, intellectually and emotionally, he's an ass, but physically now he's a human being. So we could end here, and Theseus, remember, has had to make a decision about how to rule about these love couples. And the decision he makes is that he is going to allow the love couples to remain the way they are, and that Hermia and Lysander will be a couple, and Helena and Demetrius will be a couple. And that satisfies almost everyone except for Aegeus, the father, if you'll remember at the beginning of the play, was lamenting the fact that his daughter wouldn't listen to his will. So basically what we've got is a King Aegeus who said that he's going to follow the wishes of Hermia, the female daughter, rather than the wishes of the father. And that's somewhat revolutionary when we think about gender roles and expectations at the time. But if you remember the beginning of the semester when I reviewed the syllabus and indicated some quotes that I wanted us to consider about Shakespeare, including not to expect easy answers from Shakespeare because he would present us with all of the contradictions that we experience in our daily lives. So while it would seem that Shakespeare would be making a commentary about female exertion of power and the success of doing so with a Hermia that seems to be completely undercut in many respects when we get to Fairy Titania. But as I indicated, that too is something that we can talk about a little bit more next class. And then Act 5 is the play within a play. Now we know that even from the sonnet, Shakespeare was fond of using metadrama techniques, drawing deliberate attention to the fact that he was a dramatist. And this play within a play is basically a miniature version of what we've just seen. Pyramus and Thisbe is the name of the play. It happens to be about a love relationship gone awry, but this is with a tragic ending. And as we watch Pyramus and Thisbe, we might be reminded of another famous Shakespearean play play that was about love, but that had a tragic ending, Romeo and Juliet. Now, Pyramus and Thisbe is absolutely a ridiculous performance in terms of its writing, in terms of its acting, in terms of its production. We can expect as much because Bottom and his cohorts are the ones that are putting on this particular performance. This is a wonderful opportunity for Shakespeare to make commentary about some of his competitors and their lesser quality dramas as compared to his own. It's also a wonderful opportunity for Shakespeare to give us some slapstick humor. It's one of the advantages of seeing Shakespeare actually produced on stage is that we can see much of the physicality of it. It also is an opportunity for Shakespeare to illustrate some of his bawdiness, which we also saw in his sonnets. And it also is an opportunity for Shakespeare to make some commentary about love and the lack of insight that individuals oftentimes have about love, even if they've gone through humiliating or difficult love relationships in the past, which is exactly what's going to happen with the audience of Pyramus and Thisbe, that all of the couples who were in the wilderness fighting about love are now watching this play and ridiculing it but never once stopping to acknowledge that they themselves had been equally ridiculous in love. In fact, Helena, Hermia, Demetrius, and Lysander almost come to blows in the wilderness purely because of misunderstandings and jealousies associated with love. Perhaps one of Shakespeare's most famous speeches also occurs at the very ending of this drama when Puck gives his final speech. Puck is a very interesting character. He usually is an audience favorite. He often is an actor favorite because he is controlling and manipulating the action. In fact, he oftentimes has been viewed as a kind of Shakespeare, controlling and manipulating the action. And there's a lot of room for interpretation in Puck's character, so you can play him in a lot of different ways. You can play him as either more mischievous or more deliberate and insidious, or perhaps more innocent. I've seen Puck played in a lot of different ways, from very young children playing Puck to middle-aged adults and everything in between, both male and female. Puck is almost like a Peter Pan kind of character. And for the last attendance question, I asked you which character did you like the least. It seems that Demetrius is at the top of the list. I'm not so sure if it's because of the actor's performance or it's because of the character, because Demetrius is not a very attractive character. He treats Helena terribly. Not to say that Lysander doesn't treat Hermia terribly. Yes, he does. But at least we could justify it in that he is under the influence of the love juice. And we know that Demetrius has illustrated his fickleness right at the beginning of the play. But I can say that I personally am not necessarily sure if I'm particularly fond of this particular Puck. He seems to be somewhat overly sarcastic to me. That said, obviously, there is no right or wrong answer for a favorite or for a least favorite acting performance. As you saw, many of you have very different kinds of interpretations about the acting performances themselves. And Puck's final speech would give us closure to this particular performance, and you can see that afterwards, I believe, there's a very beautiful segment with some music and dance to give closure to things. Because again, obviously, comedies are filled with music and dance. Now, there is some interpretation that's involved in this because we don't have a lot of documentation about the kinds of music and dance that would have been done during this time period. That said, I think they did a good job of mixing some contemporary and also some classical elements of music and dance in this particular performance. But I'm curious to know what you think of this performance, and that will be today's attendance question. After you have completed watching Act 3 of A Midsummer Night's Dream, I'd like to know if you liked or disliked this particular performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and why. Again, no right or wrong answer. And what we will do next class is that we will talk specifically about some elements of the play. My hope is that you are done reading A Midsummer Night's Dream by this particular point, but if you're not done, that you are at least close to being done. Remember, watching a performance is never a substitute for reading the play itself, especially when it comes to the complexities of Shakespeare. And your second journal, which would be due on Midsummer Night's Dream, is going to be due on the 3rd of March, which is Wednesday, which would allow us enough time to talk about Midsummer Night's Dream, transition over to our next play. And our next play happens to be Much Ado About Nothing. It's another comedy, so we get all of the contrasts associated with love and all of the difficulties associated with love. That said, Much Ado About Nothing happens to be a play that's set in reality, as opposed to Midsummer Night's Dream, which is set in a world of fantasy and fairies. So if you're not too fond of fantasy, my suspicion is that you will enjoy Much Ado About Nothing much more. And you should have received your first journal, which was on the sonnets, back with comments from me. And I would have graded that informally on a checkmark system, with the plus being excellent, check plus being very good, check being satisfactory. I'm happy to say that all of the grades were in that area, although there is a less than satisfactory and unsatisfactory. And I didn't evaluate it for grammar or mechanics, just for content, as if we were having a conversation on paper. So I should have returned that to you. So if you did send me your journal and you have not received it from me, please let me know, because it's probably gotten lost someplace in the digital atmosphere, and I want to make sure that gets back to you safe and sound. So again, our attendance question for today is, did you like or dislike this production, the Shakespearean Globe Performance 2014, John Light, of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and why? I hope you're well, I'm well, and next class we'll start talking about some of the specific language in A Midsummer Night's Dream. I hope you enjoy the end of the performance. Bye-bye.